Hey guys, welcome to Living the Logic. This is Manish Narayan, and today we're going to go over .NET 8 MediatR CQRS, Command Queries Responsibility Segregation. So when you're setting up microservices, you want to have the ability to separate out your commands and your queries. Your queries might go to a different data store, such as MongoDB or some sort of NoSQL database for high throughput. And then your commands can be written or write queries to, let's say, a Microsoft SQL Server or any other RDBMS system. So the idea is to take your microservice, utilize MediatR, which is a third-party NuGet package, and that'll help with separating your commands and your queries. I'm going to show you a quick way to set that up using a microservice. So open up Visual Studio 2022. You're going to create a new project. So Visual Studio 2022 by default ships out a weather API using the ASP.NET Core Web API project. So you're going to choose that project. Click on Core Web API, click on Next. And let's name this the Weather Forecast API. So Weather Forecast API. Okay, and we'll name the project Weather Forecast API. And again, I'm going to click on Next. Use .NET 8 for the framework. You can leave everything else checked as default, configure for HTTPS, and then enable Open API support so we get the default Swagger pages. Click on Create. All right, so in a second here, we'll see a brand new web API in .NET 8. Okay, I'm going to bring that screen over. All right, so out of the box, you get a controller, which is a weather forecast controller, and you get a model here, a weather forecast. I'm going to first launch this just so that you can see what the Swagger page looks like, and then we're going to refactor it to utilize MediatR CQRS. All right, so give it a moment here. It should pop up with the Swagger page, so the API should be up and running. There it is. All right, so we have the weather forecast API. I can click on Get here, and by default has some dummy data in there, and I get a set of weather forecasts. Okay, different temperatures, Celsius converted to Fahrenheit, and a summary, as well as a weather forecast date. All right, so let's go ahead and close that up and begin refactoring. The first thing we want to do is right-click the project and manage NuGet packages, and we're going to go ahead and browse for MediatR. All right, so once that shows up, you'll see MediatR here. At the time of recording, I'm getting version 12.4.1. So I'll go ahead and install that. All right, click on Apply. And once you're done installing that package, you can go ahead and close these other windows. All right, let's go ahead and clean up a little bit our folder structure here. What I'm going to do is first create a new folder in the project, and we'll just call that Models. Okay, and I'll move the weather forecast over to the Models. And I'll click on OK, so we'll let everything rename and refactor the namespaces. Okay, all right. Now, time to take advantage of MediatR. Right? Before we do that, let's create our kind of backend dummy repository layer. So what I'm going to do is add a new folder, and we're going to call that repositories. Okay, the first repository I'm going to add is actually an interface, right? So I'm going to add an interface. We're going to name that the iWeather repository. Okay, and the weather repository interface is going to have two methods. So one is going to be a task of IEnumerable weather forecast. Okay, that's sitting in our models, and we can name that get weather forecast. It won't take any argument. We'll name it async. Okay, so basically it'll return all the collection of weather forecasts, right? And then we can add, that'll be kind of our query side of things, and we'll also add one more method to our interface, and this is for the command side of things. We will add the ability to add a new weather forecast. So we'll say add a weather forecast. Okay, and it'll accept a weather forecast model. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and save that. zoom in. All right, so we have our interface. All right. Next, we're going to create our weather repository. All right, so I'm going to right-click the repositories folder, add a new class, and that's going to be our weather repository. Perfect. We're going to take this class and implement the iWeather repository. All right. Notice how Visual Studio 2022 auto-completes a lot of the code, which is nice. I'm going to implement this interface. Okay. We got two methods here. I'll make both of them async. Okay, async, and we'll implement that in a moment here. So a bit of refactoring. We're going to go to the out-of-the-box weather forecast controller. Grab the static read-only summaries, remove it from the controller, bring it into the weather repository here. Okay, and then we'll take the actual get method, business logic here, move it over to the weather repository implementation for getting the weather forecast. Right, so we'll just paste that in there, and I'll just clean this up a bit. All right, perfect. And then here for the add weather forecast, again, you can connect to a backend database and add, or say insert data, insert a new weather forecast. Okay, and we're not going to connect to a backend, but this for now we'll just await task completed. Okay, so we'll kind of simulate. All right, I'll say here simulate connection to a backend database and insert a new weather forecast. All right. So that's our weather repository, okay, and our interface for the weather repository. All right, now comes MediatR. Okay, so we want to separate our reads and writes, our commands and queries. I'm going to right-click, add a new folder, and we're going to say queries. Okay, and then we'll add another folder here for our commands. So CQRS stands for Command Query Responsibility Segregation. So we'll add another folder here for all of our commands. Okay, so the first query we're going to add is to basically get all the weather forecasts. So I'll right-click the folder, add a class, and we'll call this the Get Weather Forecast Query. Right, so we're going to get rid of these brackets here. I'm going to make this a public record here, and basically it doesn't accept any arguments. It now will implement the iMediatR iRequest interface. iRequest interface. Notice it comes up with MediatR. Perfect. And let me just close this. So iRequest of type iEnumerable weather forecast. Okay, and you need to add a reference to MediatR. All right, perfect. So this is our get weather forecast query. And then for our command, we're going to add a command to add a weather forecast. So I'll add a new class here. And for the command, we're going to name that add weather forecast class. Sorry, command. So add weather forecast command. All right, again, get rid of the brackets here. We'll make this a public record. And the add weather forecast command takes in a weather forecast model. We'll call that weather forecast. And again, it implements iRequest of MediatR. And it doesn't return anything back. So basically just implements the iRequest interface of MediatR. Okay, so we have both of our implementations of command and query. So get weather forecast query and the add weather forecast command. Now let's create another folder to handle both the commands and the queries. So I'm going to add a new folder here. And we're going to call this handlers. Okay, so the very first handler we're going to add is the get weather forecast handler. So we'll add a new class here. We'll call it the get weather forecast handler. All right, so now this class is going to take advantage of MediatR, implement the iRequest handler. Okay, and it's going to be part of the MediatR library, and I will say this is taking input of get weather forecast query, okay? And then it's basically going to return back. So I'll put a comma here, query, and it's going to return back IEnumerable weather forecast from our models. Okay. Now let's go ahead and implement this handler. So basically, the idea is to dependency inject our weather repository. So I'll create a private read-only weather repository. We'll name this weather repository. Okay, so I'll create a public constructor get weather forecast handler and inject the weather repository here. Beautiful. Okay, now let's implement the iRequest handler of MediatR. So that's going to be to implement the handle method. So any commands or queries that come in, they come in via a handle method. So public async task, and the return type is IEnumerable of weather forecast. Okay, and we'll implement the handle method. And the handle method takes in a get weather forecast query. Okay, and then cancellation to, it's going to be our query here. So we'll, in this case, call it a request. And then there's a cancellation token. Okay, so that's the handle method. All right, so basically here, all we do is we handle the query and we pass it over to our weather repository. So we return await weather repository dot get weather forecast async. Okay. Get weather forecast async. All right, weather forecast. I should have also made this async, so let's just make that async here, the name of add weather forecast. I just realized that. Okay, so we'll go back to our weather repository, make sure we update the name of add weather forecast async. Okay, perfect. Shouldn't complain now. All right, heading back to the get weather forecast handler. So as you can see, let me just minimize this a bit. All right, there we go, and I'll zoom in. So the get weather forecast handler implements iRequest handler. It handles the get weather forecast query, and basically takes advantage of our dependency injected weather repository, our backend, to get the data. Okay. Now again, this weather repository for the query part can be connected to Mongo. It could be connected to some sort of document-based database or any other read-only data. And then you could have, again, inject multiple types of repositories in this handler. All right, so that's our handler for the get weather forecast query. All right, now we need to be setting up the command handler, right, for our add weather forecast command. So I'm going to right-click the handlers, add a new class, and we're going to call this the add weather forecast handler. All right, so again, it's going to implement the iRequest handler of MediatR. Okay, and it's going to take in an add weather forecast command. And that's about it. It's not going to return anything back, right? So basically, we just implement the handler now. Again, I can inject some sort of write repository, right, like SQL Server. For now, I'm going to use the same repository here. So read only weather repository. We'll call it the weather repository. Again, we'll inject this in the constructor. All right, so we'll inject this. Notice Visual Studio 2022 is auto-completing the injection there. And now we'll implement the async handle method. So task handle. Now this time it's going to take an add weather forecast command, and that's going to be our request. And then again, cancellation token, and we'll implement the handle method. So basically we just await again, use our weather repository, and add weather forecast async. And the weather forecast async expects a weather forecast model. So that will be part of the request. So we'll say request.weatherForecast. All right, so we'll go ahead and save everything. So we've set up the handlers. We've set up the repositories. Okay. Now we can just go ahead and update our weather forecast controller. So we'll head over to the controller. We'll change the default controller around a bit. We'll first set up a route here. We'll call that API/weather forecast. Okay, that'll be the route to get to our API. Now we'll inject MediatR. So the power of MediatR is to kind of keep your controllers, your API controllers thin, light, move all the business logic to the handlers and the backend, right? And the controller should be just able to pick up the request and boom, send it off to the correct command or query handler, right? So here we're going to inject the I private read-only I mediator, and we'll say mediator. All right, and we'll inject it in the constructor. So I mediator, and Visual Studio sees that dependency, so it injects it in the constructor injection. Right now, we'll get rid of this route name. We'll create a getter. Right, so this will return. I'm going to just go ahead and change this to async task I action results. We'll get rid of iNormal. We'll go get weather forecast. Right, so we'll create I action result, and we'll name this method get weather forecast. Okay, and now we see the power of MediatR. So what I can do is say var weather forecast equals await MediatR dot send. Okay, and we're going to send the query. So send new get weather forecast query. Okay, and we can close that up here. All right, that's it. So MediatR, should be able to pass the query. In this case, no parameters here, but you can add like pagination, filtering, and so on. Here, we're just going to return OK weather forecast. Boom! Look how light our API controller method is. Okay, I'm going to copy this method, and we'll add one for the post for the adding a weather forecast. So post, and we'll call this add weather forecast. Okay, and it might take it from the body, JSON body, and it'll accept add weather forecast command. Call it command. Okay, and again, we use MediatR to send the command. So basically, I can send the entire command here. And for now, I'll just return. I can just return no content. Okay. So we set everything up. You need to make sure the plumbing is set up in our dependency injection. So we'll head over to program CS. Okay. Right before builder.build, we'll start to add register MediatR and then add our dependency injection for the weather repository. Okay, so here I'm going to put a comment here, register MediatR. So what you do is you grab the assemblies, equals new assembly array. New assembly array. I need to add a reference to, I believe, system.reflection. Yep. Okay. And what I'll do here is say assembly.get executing assembly. And then I'll add a type of. We need to register both the handlers, all right? Our command handler and our query handler. So we'll say get weather forecast forecast handler. Okay. Get weather forecast handler and dot assembly. And we'll also add type of add weather forecast handler and assembly. Perfect. I'm going to add a semicolon here. And now we just say builder.services.add MediatR. And we set up the configuration. And configuration register services from assemblies. And we just pass it the assemblies. Okay, the last part is to inject our repository layer. So we'll say application services injection, right? And we'll say builder.services.addScoped. And we'll say I weather repository. Implementation is the weather repository. Okay, and that's about it. So now we'll put a breakpoint on our controller. So weather forecast controller, we'll put a breakpoint on get weather forecast and one for post. Okay, and I'll go ahead and play this again. And in a moment, if everything builds fine, if I have no mistakes in here, we'll see the API launch with the Swagger page. And this time we'll see two actions, right? Swagger page is up now. Perfect. We'll see our get weather forecast, API/weather forecast, and the post method. So let's first hit get, try it out, click on execute. So notice it comes in the controller, calls MediatR. I'm going to step into this. Okay. Step into it again. And notice it hits the constructor, then it should hit my handler here. So I can hit continue. And boom, look at the requests that came in. It's a get weather forecast query. There are no parameters there, but here it's going to call the repository layer and get all the data back. So I'll hit continue. Perfect. And I see the same data we saw at the start of this video. All right, so I get all the weather forecasts. And here I can post a new weather forecast. I'll hit try it out. Execute. Okay. Notice the command that came in is the posted data. So notice it's a weather forecast object as a default date, string, temperature, and temperature Fahrenheit, temperature Celsius, and temperature Fahrenheit. So again, if I step into this, it should go to the handle method, the command handler. So hit continue. And again, it's going to go into our repository layer and maybe talk to a backend and insert the new weather forecast. For now, we'll just hit continue. All right, so as you can see, we were able to set up CQRS using MediatR very quickly, and also using a clean approach by separating our commands, our queries, our handlers, cleaning up our controller, making it light and thin, and then talking to a backend repository and injecting everything through the program CS. So this is a quick way to showcase MediatR in your real-world microservices. Please be sure to subscribe and just comment on any other topics you're interested in. It doesn't have to be .NET 8. It can be any other language or framework. So hope you had fun, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. See you next time.